Hello, Taylor Elwood from Sovereign Submission here, and today I am thrilled to have Ms. Hyde on the show here with me. She was very generous and gave me some time today so that we could chat, and I'm really grateful for that. And I see we already have some people popping in as well. Sweetest Kisses, Rainforest, and Michelle Dysart. So thank you all for being here. Ms. Hyde, please take a moment and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into the questions.
I am actually live from South Africa tonight. Um, I do BDSM and kink education. Um, Locally where I am, there wasn't a lot of information out there with regards to BDSM and, let's say, the theory side of things. So I was like, you know what? I'm new. I want to learn. And as I learn, I can share with people what I'm learning and what I'm discovering and so on. And that is how I actually started doing what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, I can appreciate that. I'm definitely in that process right now and some of the things that I'm learning, and I think it's really important that we have that ongoing education, and sometimes it's good to share it as we're learning. So I think that's awesome. And thank you for coming to us all the way from South Africa. Like that is freaking amazing. Um
Yes.
I today's topic is gonna be. Oh, go on.
So on my side, it is like 9 o'clock at night. Um, so it is quite a time difference as well. But it's absolutely wonderful um, to get the exposure more internationally.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about male submissives. That's what I tend to focus on sovereign submission, and of course, also talking, of course, to the dominant women who love them. And I have a few questions for you. So I'm going to start out with the first one, which is, around male submission, which is, what is the biggest challenge in your opinion for a male submissive around submission?
So I think the thing is that a lot of people in general will think that a man wants to be submissive because he's weak. Um, and I feel that, you know what, submission, whether it's a man or a woman, it is definitely not a sign of weakness. It takes a lot of courage to be able to say to someone, you know what, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I want to do. And I think it's a very powerful thing to be able to give over submission to someone, to say to them, you know what, for this space in time, I need you to take the reins. And that is a very vulnerable thing for men to do in general as well.
I would agree with that. I mean, that's definitely been my experience. I'm actually fortunate right now in that I'm visiting my beloved for a few days up in Canada, and so it was kind of interesting this morning because I was sharing some stuff with her, and it was definitely an act of submission and surrender. There's a huge level of trust that goes into submission in my experience. And for somebody to be able to say, I can truly allow somebody in, I can show them the deepest and highest parts of myself and give that over to them is an act of immense bravery and courage, because then it's also an act of trust. We're trusting that person to know what to do and to take the reins and have the quote unquote control, but it's not really even about control. It's much deeper than that.
No, it definitely is. It's a lot of vulnerability that comes to the surface that men, as they grow up, young boys and that are basically still taught, even today, that showing vulnerability, showing weakness. Um, and that is something that we definitely need to bring more to the forefront to make people understand that just because I'm vulnerable doesn't mean I'm weak.
Yeah, well, and I think and I'll say this speaking as a man, I think it's a particularly challenge for a lot of men because there is this cultural belief around like what is acceptable as a man to show. I mean, I posted a video a while back exploring, submission and saying, can a man be submissive? And one of the responses I got on YouTube was no. I just kind of laughed about it because it was like, well, clearly that person doesn't feel that way, but there are enough. But as I've had other men comment, there's like, well, there's more of us out there than we realize, aren't there? And I'm like, yep, there really are. But it's again part of that cultural acceptance. I think that plays a significant piece. Like, well, can a man can can a man be submissive? Kind of seems to be the question that I come up across a lot of times. And yet I see so many men who that is something they deeply desire and want. They don't want to be dominant because they might have to be dominant and in their workplace. They might have to show up a certain way in other areas of their life. So being able to have that surrender is huge.
Yes, no, it is. I remember my first ever submissive was someone who was in a very high powered environment. He actually ran his own business and so on. And for him, submission was like a reset button where he could switch off and deal with not having to deal with anything, basically. And that is what I find with a lot of submissive men is that a lot of them are in high powered positions where there's a lot of responsibility. And this gives them the chance to just like kind of switch off for a time and allow themselves to be vulnerable, to be human, basically. Because when you're in that kind of position, it is very difficult to show your human side to people.
Yeah. One of the stories that I've heard is that there are more male submissives than female dominants. Do you think this is true?
I think in a way it is, um, though I don't think that they come to the forefront and admit it that easily because of the culture and that surrounding men and submission. Um, so I do believe that there's definitely a lot more male submissives out there than what we know.
I would agree with that, and I'll just share a personal story, which is mine, which is that it took me years to come to the point where I could acknowledge and admit that to myself, let alone anyone else. Like there was some part of me that knew I wanted that, and I didn't know how to reconcile that with my identity as a man and with the expectations and things like that. So it did take a long time. And when I finally did reconcile that, it changed the way that it changed a lot of things for me. It changed to some degree the way that I play in kink. It changed the way that I showed up in my life. But I also think it became evident to me that submission for men can be a form and expression of healthy masculinity that has been denied for way too long.
Mm. No, I completely agree with that.
So, if you had any advice that you could give to a male submissive around expressing their needs and wants, what would that advice be?
So I would definitely tell them, you know what, this is one thing where take the chance. If you have a female dominant or a male dominant, depending on what your orientation is, take the chance and be honest with them. Say to them, you know what, this is something that I need in my life because being submissive for a lot of men, I feel, isn't just a want, it's a need that they have in their lives. I think that is with most of us. It's whether you're dominant or submissive, is that you've got a need to embody that role as such. And I use the term role very lightly because for a lot of us, it's not just something we play at. It's a whole lifestyle thing. So take the chance. Be honest with yourself firstly about what you want out of being a submissive, what you want to experience. And then when you have the right person that you want to explore it with, be honest with them. Open and honest communication is at the heart of everything that happens in this lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's probably the most important thing that we can do for anybody else is just to have that honesty and transparency in terms of the communication. Because at least, if nothing else, at least then you kind of determine if that person is like, no, I don't want to do it. You're sparing yourself and that person a lot of unnecessary grief because you're trying to force a fit. And I've been there, done that. So I know.
I always joke and say, you know what, we as humans, we're not telepathic, we're telepathetic. Because as much as we want to, we can't read minds. So if somebody's not going to tell us something, we're not going to know. So it's very, very important to have that open communication channels with whether it is a lifestyle change that you want to explore or whether it is just, you know what, talking to a friend about something.
I see we had another person join us. Welcome, Ray. Glad to have you here. And folks, as you know, if anything comes to mind, if you have any comments or anything, I am keeping an eye on the live chat. Just feel free. If anything, if you're like, hey, this strikes a chord or something I'm curious about, we're both here for it, within reason. And I'm going to move on to the next question here, which is, what do female dominants want from their male submissives?
That I haven't done in a long time. But for
Hmm.
me personally, it's communication. For me, that is like a non-negotiable is talk to me. Tell me what you want out of this. Because again, as I said, we aren't telepathic. If you don't tell me, I'm not going to know. And I think the thing is with a lot of female dominance, I think the thing is that as much as we have this very stereotypical view of dominatrixes out there, I think most of us are, in a way, kind of like we're in this to help the other person as well grow and explore their needs and that as much as we do what we do. I know for me personally, it's if I can help someone grow, that is absolutely wonderful. Um, And I think a lot of female dominance as well, for them, when we get to the physical part of things, like I enjoy spanking people. Um, for me, that is kind of a stress release as well, because not only am I giving that person what they need, but for me as well, as much as I'm in control, it's also my way of letting go of things. Um, so it does differ from dom to dom, what they need and what they want from their submissives. For me, it's someone who can enjoy getting spanked, for instance.
Something I've seen in a couple of different forums that kind of relates to this also is with a male submissive, like expressing what you want and need is well and good, but also being willing to wait and trust the dominant on when she's going to give that and when she chooses to, as opposed to having an expectation. Well, okay, I've told her what I want, and I want her to do it now because like topping from the bottom, basically.
Mm.
Any advice for male submissives around that?
It's all good and well to share your fantasies, but remember that anything in these dynamics are negotiated. And as much as we enjoy having fantasies come to life and fulfilling them, we aren't king to Spencers. So pressuring a dom into what you want is probably not going to get you what you want. So it's a very fine line between realizing, you know what, I'm sharing my fantasy with this person, but I also have to realize that my fantasy might not actually be what they want. So it's everything comes down to communication. So you can share. But again, don't think that, you know what, just because I shared it, it is going to be happening.
Yeah, I think that's really wise advice. And I'd say share to anyone who's watching this, whether it's live right now or on YouTube later on or on Substack later on, to just remember that like it is really important to cultivate a sense of patience, that can be its own form of surrender and submission, which can lead to some very beautiful and unusual experiences in and of themselves.
Oh, definitely. But I think it's also from the dom's perspective is that you can tell, you know what, this is something that I'm interested in. But that does not mean that the submissive has to say, you know what, yes, sure, let's do this. Um, we've also got to realize, you know what, the submissive has got their own autonomy as well. As much as you have got, submissives and slaves and so on, we still have a right to say no. We have a right to say yes. But the thing is that we need to realize, you know what, just because it's our fantasy, it doesn't mean that the other person has to say, okay, you know what, we're going to be doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome Cards BB fan, and the Kinkton commented and said this with a little flame emoji. No two pe- people mesh the same way. Some things align, some don't. As with any relationship, be patient and trust yourself, your dom, and the process.
Mm.
Yeah. And I really appreciate your point about the autonomy aspect. I mean, I think one of the things that is a good reminder is that, for myself, I would say this, but also for really any other submissive, is submission happens up to and until the point where it's like you come across a hard a realization like this doesn't work for me, and hopefully you've communicated it because you don't want to find that out the hard way. I don't think that's fun for anybody. But I think it's one of those cases where it's really being tuned in with awareness to ourselves and like what is it I want, communicating that, trusting the dom, and also being clear that if things change, like, okay, I need to communicate that as well. Closed mouths don't get fed, and sometimes they actually get hurt.
No, exactly. That's the thing. And I think that's kind of where the sentence that I learned when I first walked into this lifestyle was the thing of, I will hurt you, but I won't harm you. And as soon as we don't communicate, that is when harm happens. Because we know hurt is going to happen. Somebody's going to end up with a bruised tush more than likely. But if we don't talk, that emotional harm, 90% of the time, probably more, is where the issues lie. That if we aren't honest with each other and we don't communicate, we end up harming each other. And that is something that we don't want in this lifestyle, because if we don't communicate and the dom does something that the submissive isn't happy with, or the submissive does something that the dom isn't happy with, then it does a lot more damage to the dynamic than saying, you know what, I'm interested in doing this. And you discuss it and you come to the agreement and saying, okay, you know what, this is not going to happen in the near future, but we can look at it at some stage. But that is the whole thing. If we don't communicate, it just leads to more harm than good in these dynamics.
Mhm. I want to welcome Pierre. Glad to have you here. And before we continue with the questions, I noticed that you've had a couple books come out recently. Could you tell us a bit about those books and what they're about and where people can find them?
So I brought out two books. It's part of my Beyond Vanilla series. Um, we always talk about vanilla being, people who don't enjoy kink or who's not part of this lifestyle. But we've also got to realize that, you know what, if you look at cooking and baking and stuff like that, vanilla adds flavor. So it's not a bad term. We've just got to realize, you know what, it's just people who've got different interests than us. And that is kind of where my book series came from. Um, and it actually came from as well where I was talking to my partner and we came up with this little, let's say, slogan, for lack of a better term, of it's okay to be vanilla with a swill. because he was like super vanilla when we met. And obviously, things happen. And as he puts it, he even got some sprinkles. So beyond
I
so
love that.
so Beyond Vanilla is focused on newbies in the lifestyle, people who are curious, wanting to explore in that. So the first book is about the foundations of kink. That is where I focus on the four pillars, which is honesty, communication, respect, and trust. Because without those, you don't have consent. And we know that consent is at the heart of everything in BDSM and kink. Then the second book is about consent. And consent is something that is non negotiable in kink. So it's about the different types of consent that we do get in this lifestyle. Because as much as, let's say, on the vanilla side of things, yes is yes and no is no. When it comes to kink, we know that sometimes yes is no and no is, pineapple. So it looks at the different kinds of consent that we do get in BDSM. So everything from your basic informed consent up to even, consensual non-consent, blanket consent, retroactive consent, things like that, and how they actually play roles. And I know I said now retroactive consent. So before anybody decides that I need a spanking, please don't apply retroactive consent to anything that you do. So the books are available on PayHip at the moment. And then, yeah, by about end of March, we're bringing out book 3.
Excellent. And people can find information about that on your Substack, correct?
That is correct. Also,
Great.
if they go onto PayHip directly, they can just go and look for Miss Hyde. They'll find me there.
Yeah, and I will have some information in the show notes as well, folks. So like when you after this finishes recording, I'll update it and you'll find that below here, or if you're on YouTube, you'll find some information there as well. So that way you can go and check out the amazing books that Ms. Hyde has put together. All right, so let's continue on with questions. One of the things that I found kind of fascinating is along the lines of journaling
Mm.
for submissives, just in general. But what do you think the benefits are of a submissive journaling and sharing that journaling with their dominant? Because
So,
that's a very private thing.
oh gosh, yeah. Um, so talking about journaling and that, I mean, like my partner, I don't know how it ended up because I mean, like communication is my thing, and I ended up with a partner who doesn't talk. So I've got the irony of that. So when it comes to journaling, it is something that I know is going to be difficult for a lot of people to share with their dominant because it's our most inner private thoughts. But it's also a great way that if you are worried and you feel that you're not brave enough to actually sit down, have the conversation, journaling is a great way to share your thoughts about, what's happening in the dynamic, what's happening within yourself, fantasies that you might have. So it's a great way to explore. And I think the thing is that when you start thinking about entering this lifestyle or even entering a dynamic, start with journaling because most of the time we're going to write stuff down. Somewhere along the line, we're going to realize, okay, you know what? Maybe this is something that, yes, I do want to explore further. Or, you know what? This is an absolutely crazy fantasy that should actually never ever see the light of day. But it's some way that we can explore. So if we have those crazy, dark fantasies and that, and ideas of what we want to explore, journaling, writing down, it's a great way to explore those things.
Mhm. Welcome, Dave03. Glad to have you here. And, in your experience, what level of trust is needed to share that journaling? I mean, it's like, okay, here's the thing. I've written it. Most people don't share journals with each other, in
No,
my
that's the
experience.
thing. Yeah. No, the goodness. Actually makes me think now of Iron Man, or where was it? The Avengers, the last Avengers movie, where, Tony was told, I love you 3000. And that is kind of the level of trust that you need to have in your dynamic in order to feel comfortable enough to share your journal. Because this is not just a thing of the dominant saying to the submissive, you know what, trust me, it's fine. Um, we know that words sometimes are just there to placate the other person. So this is really something where you needed to have shown that you are really trustworthy for your submissive in order to share, for them to share their journal with you. Because this is not just saying, you know what, trust me, I know what I'm doing. Um, it's an extremely high level of trust that's needed here.
Hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting thing because, like, with my mistress, sometimes we actually read each other's journal entries, so it's a mutual exchange of trust. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
case for everyone who does their things, but that's something that she's been willing to do with me. And I think the one thing that it's really imprinted upon me is just how essential that trust is, how it goes both ways. And
Mhm.
it's not a one-way street. Like, yes, if I'm surrendering and submitting to someone, there's a level of trust there, but there's also a level of trust that comes with being the dominant and being able to trust that like in the case of my mistress, that she can trust that I'm being real and forthright with her and communicating, and that she's not going to inadvertently do something that could scar me or whatever, other than in a fun way. So I mean, can we talk for a few moments a little bit about that and, like, what the trust is for the dominant needs, or that the dominant may have, or something along those lines, just so that the submissives and the audience can kind of appreciate where that comes into play.
So, there's a very apt saying for this, and that is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Because this is the kind of trust where, as you said, you know what, it's a two-way street. So if I'm going to want my submissive to share with me their deepest and darkest thoughts, I need to be willing to do the same. And that is where you build that kind of level of trust needed in this lifestyle, because there's so much emotion and vulnerability and just everything linked to it. It's not just, this is definitely not a wham bam, thank you, ma'am kind of thing. Um, because as soon as you step into a dynamic with someone, you need to know that they literally have their lives or you have their lives in your hands. And if you're going to want your submissive to share their thoughts and that with you, you need to be able to do the same. So it's definitely that kind of level of trust that needs to be shown from both sides. So if you're going to want your submissive to be vulnerable with you, as much as we like to think, you know what, DOMs are superhuman, you need to be able to show some vulnerability as well. Because that is the way that your submissive is going to know that, you know what, I can trust you with what I'm about to share with you. Because if I don't show vulnerability from my side, I cannot expect you to do the same. And that
Mm.
is what is so important in this. Because if you still look at, what's out there in the media, when you look at how DOMs are portrayed, you still see so many that is like almost encased in armor, that there's no vulnerability showing there. And I think that is something that actually we need to start learning and teaching, that it needs to change, because we're not the same as what we were 10 years ago, 40 years ago, even 5 years ago in terms of this lifestyle. A lot has changed and a lot has evolved. And it's time that we learn that, you know what, as dominant, it's okay for us to be human. And I think that we actually build a much stronger dynamic with our submissives to show them that, you know what, we've got feelings as well. You can trust us with your vulnerabilities. We're not going to use it against you.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said too, I think, for the fact that sometimes, like, what makes helps me trust my mistress is when she shares something or she shares a need that she has to be taken care of and to
Mm,
know that she's being taken care of, that it's not just that it's not just even that it's not just, like a one-way street again. It's not, taking care of each other, that's a two-way street. It's like with anything else, it's there's a give and a take, there's a connection there that needs to be maintained. And, it could be as simple as filling up the water in in a water purification thing, and that could still be a form of taking care of somebody. It could be much more complicated than that, but I think it's really important to like dial into that and recognize that it's something so there's something so grounding about being able to come to somebody and say, regardless of what the position is in the dynamic, I in this moment I need to be taken care of.
mm. I know I spoke to a male dominant a while back where he was talking about his struggle with depression.
Hmm.
And with this whole culture as well around what we believe dominance should be, because a lot of us learn from what is portrayed in the media, what we see. Um, and he was so worried that him having this struggle means that he's not a dominant anymore. And that is something that we need to teach people, whether you are a female dominant, male dominant, or, you know, anyone in that kind of position, that by showing that, you know what, I do have my struggles, I can tell them now that more than likely your submissive is going to feel comfortable opening up even more to you than what they already are, because they know that, you know what, they can understand my struggles. Because we're so used to seeing just strong dominant out there. As I said, basically the armor plated dominant of there's nothing that can touch me. And I think that is definitely something that we need to start working at showing people that, you know what, it's okay to feel vulnerable. It's okay to have our moments that we think, you know what, I'm struggling at this moment. I need to be taken care of. Um, because we think so often that, you know what, we need to keep taking care of somebody else. And sometimes it's okay, as you said, you know what, just realizing I can fill up the water system, put water in the fridge, make some ice, simple things. It's things that, you know what, your dominant's going to appreciate, because it's stuff that they don't have to worry about. But I think the main thing is that as much as we look at physical needs, we need to start focusing more as well on the emotional needs, because we are human. Whether you're a dominant, whether you're a submissive, switch, it doesn't matter. We're all human. And we need to realize, you know what? We've all got our human moments.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I just want to welcome Eve Gardner and AG Martins. Thank you. Glad to have everyone here. It's always wonderful to have people attending these live, and I appreciate it so much. One thing that kind of comes to mind with that is, and I wrote about this in my article for yesterday, which was about nice guy submissives, where they're not really, they're submitting from performance instead of presence. It's like a form of codependency. So I think it's kind of interesting because it's like communicating those emotional needs and being able to communicate clearly and transparently from both ends, is really essential. What is it that both the dominant and the submissive can do to recognize when there is the potential for codependent behaviors forming through the dynamic, which I think would take away from the erotic flow of the dynamic?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that you know what, again, it comes down to communication, because as soon as you shut down those channels, then that is when you realize, you know what, things aren't working out the way it's supposed to. And as much as we are in these dynamics that we know, you know what, there is a sense of dependency on each other. But as soon as you start going into that codependent mode, then you need to realize, you know what, this is becoming a unhealthy dynamic. So if we start talking about things and we realize, okay, you know what, I can see in my submissive's behavior that, you know what, they are starting to rely more on me to make decisions for them, for instance. And I'm not talking about, you know, what, saying to your submissive saying, okay, does mistress want me to wear the black underwear today? You know, these are life changing decisions that submissives or even dominant start leaving in somebody else's hands. Because as soon as we become codependent, then, yeah, things aren't working the way they're supposed to. Because as much as things from the outside can look unbalanced, basically, because we know that if you look at a normal or a DS relationship from the outside, somebody's going to think, you know what, but there's no equality in this. There's no 50-50. But they don't know everything that went on behind the scenes. So as soon as things really start getting the way it looks from the outside, then yes, you need to start talking. You need to realize that, you know what, things aren't going the way they're supposed to. Um, because even in our everyday life relationships and that, as soon as codependency starts, then you know what, we're going down a road that we're not supposed to be going down at the moment.
Yeah. Hmm. Good advice. Thank you. I'm going to wrap up here. First, I want to just thank you for coming on. I know I approached you a while back, and it took a little while, and I appreciated that you were like very clear, like what you needed. This is a great example of good communication, and so I really appreciate that. And I would like to know, well, there's two things. So first is, where can people find you on the web and learn more about you?
So, as I said in the beginning, I am based in South Africa. So, I don't think that most of my followers are actually based in South Africa. So, you can find me on Substack, on other social media platforms. I also have my website. That is just misshyde.co.za. If they want to know a bit more about what I do. But generally, just follow on Substacks. I've got my series currently that I'm doing for the 365 days of BDSM. So yeah, and that is very much focused on newbies in the lifestyle. So you can just find me on social media, basically.
And it's you're putting out some really good writing out there. I've been reading your articles. I really appreciate everything that you share, and I think it's such a benefit. So for any of you who are watching this, whether live or recorded, definitely check out Miss Hyde's Substack. I will have a button or a link or something like that below in the show notes later on, so you can go check that out. And then the final question I ask, and this is a question I like to ask all of my guests, is if you have a word or a phrase of wisdom that we can take with us into the day moving forward.
I think I actually mentioned it earlier, and that is the I will hurt you but not harm you. That is like my go to for everything that I do, because we know that there's going to be hurt. Um, Obviously, my sadistic little heart loves that part. um, but the thing is that we need to realize that, you know what, we're not there to harm each other. So we know, as I said, somebody is going to end up with a bruised tush more than likely, um, or some rope marks or whatever. But the emotional harm is something that we can consciously work on. We can't guarantee that it's not going to happen because we human, mistakes happen, things happen. But as soon as we start consciously making decisions not to harm the other person, then most of the time the harm is not going to be there.
Mm, wonderful. Thank you so, so, so much for coming on here. I so appreciate it. And for those of you who came in late, this will be coming out here momentarily, probably like in another hour or so. It just takes a little time to process. And I will also be posting this up on FetLife as well as on here. So again, thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Miss Hyde, so much. I really appreciate you making time
No,
for me today.
it's an absolute pleasure. I hope everyone has a lovely day further. I'm close to bedtime.
All right. Well, good night and sleep well.
Thanks. Bye.
And